Um, the topic here obviously relates to a very urgent matter. I'm guessing everybody who has joined us knows that things could not be more urgent as far as addressing the climate crisis. As Al Gore said a while ago, we've entered a period of consequences. We're seeing that with a monster hurricane bearing down very quickly on Florida right now, and all the bad news we hear from Texas and California and Pakistan and Southern Europe and everywhere else. We're seeing the effects of climate change. And we are covering one particular aspect of it, the electricity that we use and where that electricity comes from. We have a distinguished panel here joining us. I, just so you know, am a member of the City County Task Force on Climate and Economic Equity, which is the task force we'll get into that is designed plans to really reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also improve racial equality in our area. And I came that way by being an activist with Citizen Action of Wisconsin. Joining us, and we'll be asking our guests to share more about themselves, are Kathleen Gallagher, who's the executive director of Five Lakes Institute and a longtime investigative reporter for the journal Sentinel. Nick Hylla, who's the executive director for the Milwaukee Renewable Energy Association, and Dunaiski, who's the distributed resource director for Renew Wisconsin, which is the big group that pushes for renewable energy in Wisconsin. Next slide, Eric. So just a brief overview of the agenda. The goal here is to make this as interactive as possible so that people can ask their questions and make their comments and hear from our panelists, our experts on the matter. We're asking people as far as questions go to save them until the end so that we have a presentation from Eric, and then we have a reaction from the panelists, and then we have questions. If you want to ask a question, you can do so either by putting a message in the chat or by raising your hand. You'll see at the lower part of your screen, you can hit reactions and then hit raise hand if you want to be seen, and then you'll be called on. So just to give a little bit of overview, sort of the reason this is a topic now, obviously there's a long-term need to have greener electricity with renewable energy. The occasion for this particular forum is that there actually are some rather large plans that are being drawn up in Milwaukee City and County to dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions and at the same time to be reducing racial inequality by providing job opportunities and economic benefits to people who've been discriminated against to this day in our society. And I guess you go to the next slide, Eric. So the timeline for that is the task force was formed by resolution by the city and county and started working in 2019. And it's been a lot between, I'll just summarize very briefly, basically 9 working groups with over 80 contributors, experts, got together to formulate initial plans. And we solicited public comments through a variety of means and received 640 separate public comments on the planning. Right now, it's gotten to a point where there's a consultant, Grafe Consulting, that's pulling together the 9 working group plans and hopefully bringing some regularity to them that are going to be public in the near future that everybody can see. The adoption of the full proposal we're hoping happens towards the end of this year, the beginning of next year, and then we actually start seeing implementation next year for these plans. The plans are summarized in 10 big ideas. Really, if you know much about climate and energy, there's actually many things that need to be done to actually reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And they're pulled together in these 10 big ideas. One of the 10 big ideas is a net zero electric grid, where basically our electricity no longer comes from fossil fuels. As Eric and I will get into, that is arguably the biggest piece of the puzzle. So that's partly why we're starting with this particular topic for a forum. So hopefully everybody knows that the reason we're experiencing the climate change we are and facing a potential catastrophe is because of carbon emissions, largely from fossil fuels, both especially in the form of methane and carbon dioxide. And hopefully people are aware that the results of increasing heat trapping gases in the atmosphere and the warming that we're seeing are just increasingly catastrophic. We're seeing just tremendous floods, which will get worse. We're seeing devastating droughts, which are already affecting our growing of food in large parts of the United States. We're seeing heat waves that are so bad people cannot be outside. And all of that is related to air pollution, which is, emitted at the same time as greenhouse gases. So when it comes to our electricity, the important thing to know is that our electricity is generated and distributed by a regulated monopoly, basically a for-profit company that has exclusive rights to generate the electricity and distribute it. It's regulated by the Public Service Commission, which is a state agency, and obviously the state legislature can pass laws and rules as well. The important takeaway is that as much as we'd like to see the electricity go green right away, the city and county actually have no direct control over that, or very little direct control over that. And mostly what needs to happen is influencing, getting our utility and our regulators and our legislators to get the utility to do what needs to be done. Currently, the mix of power coming from our utility in this area, We Energies, is overwhelmingly fossil fuels. Basically, the electricity is generated by 2/3 or 3/4 of the source of electricity is currently fossil fuels, coal or natural gas primarily. And the result actually is a study by the Center on Wisconsin Strategy showed that about $14 billion leaves our state each year to pay for that fuel coming in. And with the current mix, you can see we have a very, very long way to go before we have truly green grid where we're getting our electricity from clean sources. The benefits of getting our electricity from clean sources, just to be clear, clean energy basically means renewable energy, which is primarily solar and wind and increasingly battery storage, which are emission-free and have tremendous benefits as far as the climate goes. They also have associated benefits, sometimes called co-benefits, in that keeping that $14 billion in the state and investing in the upgrades to have renewable energy should result in a lot of jobs and economic opportunity. It should tremendously reduce other air pollutants like nitrous oxide and sulfur dioxide. And in the long run, it should be substantially cheaper to be generating our electricity from renewable sources than from our current fossil fuel sources. So Erick will get into more detail on this, but remember I talked about there's a comprehensive plan that's been developed or is in process of being finalized for Milwaukee City and County. And one of the things that we do is we look at, okay, how much of a reduction in greenhouse gases are we going to get from each of the activities in that plan? And what this pie chart represents is the proportion that one of the consultants that we've been working with believes our reductions will come from. The green actually is getting more renewable energy on the grid, having more of our electricity come from renewable sources. As you can see, that makes up the vast majority of the greenhouse gas reductions we hope to achieve. So it's a very, very important part of what we're doing to reduce emissions. Currently, We Energies has made significant moves towards getting more renewable energy on the grid. They have plans within this decade to have 800 megawatts of solar online and 600 megawatts of battery storage, and are spending $2 billion to get more renewables on the grid. When we met with them, asked why that is, because they haven't always been friendly on climate issues, they said it's very simple, the economics. It's basically more profitable and cheaper to use renewable energy now in many ways. What's lagging as far as the behavior of We Energies is that if you look into the details of their plan, they say they're going to tremendously reduce their emissions, but they're counting on carbon capture and storage and natural gas partly due to that, which is highly questionable. They intend to keep one of the Oak Creek power plants open into the 2040s. Again, very questionable for many people who care about reducing emissions. And generally, they've been opposed and caused difficulties with what we call distributed generation, where people can have solar panels on their roof or community solar that they're bought into. They've opposed third-party financing, they've opposed community solar, and the rate structure has been designed to disincentivize going to renewable energy in a distributed way in many ways. So we have to continue to work with We Energies to make progress in this area. At this point, I believe, Erick, you'll take over.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ted. So I'm Erick Shambarger. I'm Director of Environmental Sustainability for the City of Milwaukee. I lead a division called the Environmental Collaboration Office, or ECO. And our job is to make Milwaukee a world-class eco city. And a big part of that is leading the climate work, both internal to city operations, but then also supporting the task force at large. And we talked a little bit about this, that the cities across the country are establishing bold climate goals. In many ways, cities are leading. And yet we don't have direct control over the utilities. It's a little tricky for people to kind of get their arms around how to make this, where to advocate for change, because you have the legislature and state policy dictates a lot of this. You have the Public Service Commission, which is based in Madison, that regulates things and have some arcane processes, although they're trying to get better to allow for public comment on things like utility rate cases and other major decisions that the utilities have. But I have to figure out, as working with the city, what can we do both for city operations and as from an advocacy standpoint. And I'll come back to these two themes, but basically it comes down to what can we do to leverage our influence as a large purchaser, as a large customer, since the city uses electricity for everything from streetlights to treating water to our buildings. And long term, we want to transition our vehicles from off of gasoline to become electric, which means we need clean energy for electric vehicles. And also longer term, there's a lot of discussion about getting off of natural gas for heat, which would require electric heating. And of course, we want our power to be clean. So advocacy and using our purchasing muscle are the two best ways that we've come up with through the planning process to leverage our influence. So what have we done so far? We have worked successfully with We Energies. We built the largest solar energy project in the city's history, a 2.25 megawatts solar project on a city-owned landfill next to General Mitchell Airport. So the next time you take off, you can see that project. We have done group buys with the Midwest Renewable Energy Association. Hylla's on the call, one of our panelists, and they've been a really, really strong partner over the years in trying to bring bulk pricing to rooftop solar. We've worked with them on workforce development. We've tried to streamline the planning and permitting and zoning of solar to make it easier for our inspectors to know what to look for in doing solar. We've done PACE financing. There's a picture that's a city building, the Clark building downtown, where we financed a large solar array on the deck of the parking structure there. We've done solar on our libraries. We've been very active in pushing, trying to get legal clarity on third-party financing of solar. And we helped co-found the Wisconsin Local Government Climate Coalition to advocate, to bring cities together to advocate for change. It's really important from my standpoint. One of the things that's been guiding our principles here is we want a robust and competitive rooftop solar market to make it easier for people who want to install solar on their own roof, to make it easier. But we also recognize that we need what's called utility scale solar. So very, very large energy systems. You want to use as much rooftop space as you can. But I don't think there's enough rooftop space, enough good quality roofs that have adequate sunlight to get to net zero. So we have to look at these big utility scale transitions as well. So it's a both and approach. As we think about both the sustainability components of the clean energy transition, I think we would hopefully all agree that there are other important principles just to keep in mind. We want a reliable grid, so when we flip the switch, we know the power is going to be there. We want it to be affordable with an eye towards equity. And there's a lot of discussion right now about how to structure rates so that they are affordable, particularly for people of color who have a higher energy burden. There needs to be fairness in how these costs are shared. Again, balancing a stable electricity distribution system that the utility controls with this market that could be had in the rooftop space, and a lot of job potential if we can do a better job integrating distributed solar onto the grid. And then again, we want good paying jobs, both in the market for rooftop solar, but also in the utility scale space. So we've talked about a lot, but we're really boiling it down to the direct purchasing options that the city might have, and then the advocacy to try to get bigger scale changes. And work with both, trying to work with the utility to encourage them to do the right thing, but also working with the regulators at the Public Service Commission to make sure that we're all moving in the same direction. On the advocacy side, I'll start there. We have long been involved in getting involved in rate cases and other utility hearings. And then more recently, we started the Wisconsin Local Government Climate Coalition. So this is a coalition of Milwaukee, Milwaukee County, Dane County, Madison, Eau Claire, La Crosse, Green Bay. So many of the cities around Wisconsin all have similar goals, and we all need a better statewide policy environment to reach our local goals. So we're all getting together and writing joint letters to the PSC and advocating to kind of increase our collective strength. And when we talk to the PSC, we talk about having, again, this utility scale renewable energy transition with clear benchmarks. So this is really important. The utility has said they want to retire their coal-fired power plants by 2035, which is great. But we think the Public Service Commission needs to be more strategic and hold them accountable for meeting periodic benchmarks so we can make sure that we're on a clear path and not backsliding towards these goals. We'd like to see universal access to solar. So there's a whole range of policies to make it easier to do rooftop solar. And again, that competitive rooftop solar market. Within rooftop solar, we want to keep doing what we're doing and keep growing it. And there is a tremendous opportunity through the federal climate bill that just got passed, known as the Inflation Reduction Act. There are a lot of tax credits and things in there to make solar more affordable than ever. And so we are going to be scaling up our work with the contracting community, with other interested parties to help make it easier for homeowners to access those tax credits and get as much rooftop solar as we can. And then keep working with our municipal facilities or city buildings to get more solar. And then the big one here that we've been working actually somewhat productively with We Energies is to try to get a new program that we're calling Renewable Pathway Program. So this would be a Public Service Commission approved program that We Energies would offer. Since 2009, we have had a goal to try to get 25% of our power for city buildings, 25% of that from renewable sources by the year 2025, which is not very far away. And we've done as much as a lot with rooftop solar. There's some more we could do, but I have come to the conclusion that we could hope for, major structural changes that would really open up the market. But if I need to get 25%, I really feel like we need to work with the utility if we can to purchase renewables. And so we have worked with them on based on input from the task force on a proposal where large customers could agree to buy into large scale solar farms that We Energies would own. We still have our current energy bill, but if you want solar, you can buy into these large scale solar. And the important difference of their existing programs that they have an old program called Energy for Tomorrow, but it isn't really adding new solar. With this program, the idea would be if you have large customers like the city, like the county, maybe like Aurora Healthcare or other big institutional providers or customers, that they would say, look, we've got corporate sustainability goals. We Energies, we want you to build new solar and we will buy into it. So that's the proposal. It's what's called a sleeve tariff for those of you who are into utility speak. We were specific to them that we wanted a local labor provision in there. That was a big topic that came out of the task force working groups, is that there should be provisions that these things should be built in southeastern Wisconsin with local labor. We also know that with the Inflation Reduction Act, there is a lot of policies can change. And we didn't want to sign on to a 20-year commitment knowing that the policy environment could change. So we got what I think are reasonable subscriptions, 1 or 5 years. Again, large customers could get up to 100% renewable energy. And importantly, the customers who use the program would get what are called renewable energy credits, or RECs, which are, how you account for your carbon use for large customers. An important note is that we submitted this or worked with them when it looked like hope was lost on a federal climate bill. So as it stands now, it would cost the city a little bit extra to get renewable energy. We would still pay our existing electric rates and pay a little bit of a 1 cent per kilowatt hour premium to get the solar. With the Inflation Reduction Act and the new tax credits, I would hope the Public Service Commission could revisit that and see if the cost could come down a little bit. But that's really the heart of the proposal. And we look forward to feedback and answering questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric. So we're going to have ask our panelists to introduce themselves, say a little bit about their background and their organization and how it relates to the topic at hand, and to answer a couple simple questions kind of as best you can. One is sort of, what is your reaction to the plan as you've seen it presented? And specifically, you know, what challenges do you see in accomplishing the goals? What opportunities do you see to be able to actually succeed? And then second question is, you know, any thoughts just on how we can accomplish the goal of greening our electricity? So why don't we start out? I'll just go in order from left to right. Why don't we start out with you, Nick?
Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for the great presentation, Eric, and for organizing TED. My name is Nick Hylla. I'm the Executive Director of the Midwest Renewable Energy Association. We're a nonprofit organization founded in Wisconsin in 1990. We're a member association. We have over 2,500 members. We work in 7 Midwest states, and some of our core activities are technical training. We train over 600 folks a year to design, install, operate, maintain solar energy systems. We work with jurisdictions to engage local homes and businesses to bulk procure solar. So as Eric mentioned, we've worked in Milwaukee a few times. We've done 19 megawatts of distributed generation and over 50 programs. And we host the Energy Fair. You should come. It's in June every year. It's a great time. We run the State Solar and Schools program with support from the Cleared Solar Foundation. We manage a regional partnership of technical community colleges that provides workforce experience and employment pathways for their students, and run a resource center at solarenergy.jobs. And sometimes we get drawn into fights with the utilities, so we're petitioning the Public Service Commission currently to clarify that third-party financing is illegal under state law. And that's my introduction. You know, hold my reactions until everybody else introduce themselves.
No, why don't you just go right into it, Nick? Give us your reaction and we'll do it all together.
Yeah, I'll say this is just to clarify and not take up too much time. You know, I think, you know, not all solar is created equal, right? So there's solar that exists in the distribution system as rooftop solar, and then there's large scale solar, and there's a distinct difference. And it's tempting to think about rooftop solar as a capacity addition, as if it were a coal-fired power plant. But the difference is that that solar energy is distinct in at least 2 very significant ways. The first is that it functions much more as an energy efficiency appliance, meaning that it reduces the demand for electricity, because that electricity production exists at the point of consumption, which means it doesn't have to go through the transmission system to get to your house. And so effectively, it's part of a suite of energy tools that we can collectively use to do what's known as demand response or demand destruction in the distribution system. That is a benefit to all ratepayers for a number of reasons. One, it reduces the need to build new power plants if it's done correctly, which reduces the electricity costs now and in the future. It also happens where homes and buildings and people live, and so it's a major jobs engine. The distributed solar industry employs per megawatt 5 times more people than the large scale solar industry. And when paired with energy storage, it can provide significant grid service, and is increasingly doing so. And so I think the path to greening the grid has to involve efficiency and demand reduction in the distribution system. And that should be the ultimate priority of all policies, is to make our grid smarter, because the grid has one operating principle, and that supply must equal demand or failure occurs. And historically, because, as Ted mentioned, we have a regulated system by which for-profit corporations enjoy monopoly privilege over their customers and get paid plus interest or plus profit for the things that they build. We have historically just built more and more and more to satisfy increasing demand. But the evolution of technologies such as solar and energy storage and demand response and the whole suite of software applications and electrification tools that go with that have given us the opportunity to, instead of building very expensive peaking power plants, we can reduce electricity demand during times of peak use and load shift into other times to when electricity is cheaper, increase the efficiency of existing power plants, produce electricity in the distribution system, and save everybody money. And so that is the tremendous opportunity that's presented to us. The other distinct benefit of distributed generation over a typical large-scale facility is that it's customer money, which means that ratepayers don't pay back, because the way that a power plant works is when you build a power plant, we are on the hook as electricity ratepayers. We're not customers. Customers have choice. We don't have choice. We only have one choice. That's a monopoly utility company. When they build something, we pay it back through elevated rates. We pay it back plus a protected rate of return for the investors in those companies. But when a private entity, such as the city of Milwaukee or a local home or a local business, builds a solar asset, they do so with their own money. And so it is really the only competition that we have in a monopolized market, in that if you install a solar electric system and the utility raises rates, your internal rate of return increases. If you install energy efficiency appliance in your house, new windows, air sealing, and electricity rates go up, then the internal rate of return for your investment also increases. And so it's effectively the only tool we have to protect ourselves from the for-profit interests of the companies that deliver our electricity, which is increasingly fundamental to modern existence. And so I also agree with Eric, in as much as all things are needed. You know, if we are really going to transition to a green grid, there's not enough roof space in the city of Milwaukee to satisfy our tremendous energy demand. We Energies must be a partner here, but they do not currently, as the rules are written, have any financial incentive or political incentive to help distributed generation or to help their customers use electricity. The opposite is actually true. They benefit when they can prove an increasing electricity demand to build more stuff, and that you continue to use more electricity, so all of that stuff can be paid back. And so the last point I'll make is that oftentimes, you know, approaching the energy advocacy on a case-by-case basis is a loss, because the system needs to be changed. And that system is one in which if we are going to maintain a privately controlled, profit-oriented monopoly system to deliver electricity in an increasingly innovative and efficient market, then we need to change the incentives. And the incentives can't be to build more and get customers to use more. They have to be incentives such as grid reliability, carbon reduction, local job creation, affordability. And so we need to switch our regulatory paradigm to one that is performance-based instead of profits-based. And I see some of the elements in and I see a lot of it in the advocacy that takes place, and I think we need a lot more of it. And that will end my comments. Thank you.
Great, Nick. Thank you. Some great insights there. Our next panelist to speak would be Kathleen.
Hey, could I ask, like, this screen is driving me crazy. I would like to see everyone. Could we just, and could you spotlight all the panelists? I just think it would be more interesting for everyone if you guys are up for it. And then I wouldn't be so big, which would also make me happy. Thank you.
There you go.
I'll start while you're doing that. You know, what he said. Do I have to say any more? I don't know as much about this as the other panelists, and I think I'm on this panel because I write 5 Lakes Institute is a nonprofit that works to spur economic development in the Midwest and Great Lakes region. And I write a column for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and I think that's why I'm on this panel, because I wrote a column about solar, and it was super interesting for, well, not so third-party solar financing, but it was super interesting for me because I didn't know a lot about this topic. And as I called around, what I learned is there are a lot of people in the state who know a ton about it. It's like it's like an imbalanced scale in a way, right? There are all these people who know a lot about it, and then people like me previously who know nothing about it. And, you know, how do you transfer the knowledge and act on it, right? So I also do, just to say it, I do a podcast on WWM called Midwest Moxie, where I interview founders of emerging companies, in technology companies in the Midwest. I'm learning a lot just listening to, for example, what Nick said, but I think what I took away from it is the idea that, you know, if I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'll say this is my interpretation, and everyone say what they think, but if you put a lot of money into building these big alternative energy projects with the utilities, you're plugging into a system that exists, as Nick pointed out, to that has no incentive to do what you're trying to do. So it seems futile to me I mean, I get it that you want to do big solar projects with a utility because you want that solar to happen, but you're perpetuating the system that you're trying to change. And the research I've done about alternative energy, just it's overwhelmingly obvious that you should have distributed power. So, you know, I guess my provocative question would be, should the city of Milwaukee, which, you know, in 2018 lost the battle to control its destiny with its own solar projects and instead was forced to collaborate with We Energies, should the city of Milwaukee do that? Or should the city maybe give out grants to people who want to do their own smaller distributed power projects? Because in the end, it just seems like, why would you perpetuate the system you're trying to change? It's my provocative question.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, you're an investigative journalist, and a fresh insight sometimes can be very helpful for this. So appreciate your participation. Our cleanup hitter here will be Sam Dunaiski. So Sam, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm really excited for this conversation. I am the Distributed Resources Director here at Renew Wisconsin. Renew is a renewable energy advocacy organization at heart. We work on renewable energy policies and regulatory affairs. Most of that happens at the Public Service Commission, so intervening on cases and dockets there. We also educate and work with state legislators at the Capitol to advance renewable energy legislation. We're located in Madison, as you can probably guess, because that's where all of that kind of work happens. We also run programs that speed renewable energy adoption in our state, similar to the one that Nick mentioned, Solar on Schools. So we do some solar programming as well. And we also provide just kind of general education and outreach on renewable energy technology, just to better inform the public about the multiple benefits that clean energy has to offer. And our work, you know, mostly relates to solar and wind, but we also work in the realm of biogas and local hydropower as well. And now we're branching out into what we consider clean energy. So these are not necessarily renewable energy generation sources, but other things and aspects that can utilize clean energy. So like electric vehicles, energy and battery storage, heat pumps, and other beneficial electrification and things like that. So what I do as the Distributed Resources Director, I work on programs, education, and policy of distributed energy resources, kind of telling folks what they are, what they aren't, again, kind of helping to propagate installations more at the individual or the distributed level. I run 2 of our solar programs, the sort of sister program to MREA's Solar on Schools, which is called Solar for Good. That is also funded, by the Couliard Solar Foundation. It's been in place since 2017. We've done over 120 installations now on houses of worship, veterans homes, affordable housing, you name it. Over 4.3 megawatts of solar just in that program as well. So that's really great. And I also run a program called Madison, which is very similar to Milwaukee Shines. We have 3 programs. We have a group buy program for homeowners and residents. We have a business program, and we also have what's called a backyard program, which I kind of consider to be Solar for Good Light. So it helps nonprofits and affordable housing providers with grants to help with some of the upfront costs of that. I also work, like I said, on the promotion of distributed energy products and the education and the technology around distributed energy resources. And over the last year or 2, I've also gotten into some policy work as well as these distributed resources just become more prevalent around the state. I also serve as the co-chair of the Sustainable Madison Committee here in Madison. I've been with Renew for like 4 years. Before that time, I was an operational meteorologist. So I always have a good icebreaker at parties and things like that. So when I pivoted to this career, I always approached sort of solving this transition through kind of a basic, math and engineering background as kind of, my training was to be had. And I've realized now over the last 4 years of being at Renew that this problem is anything but just a simple math equation of taking out, kilowatt hours here and putting in other kilowatt hours there. It's social science. It's political science, it's finance. I mean, you name it, it is everything. And all of those items are really, really important because, as this transition takes place, we have a really big opportunity to do it right and to do it right the first time and make this an equitable transition for everyone. A lot of times, in society, we've had big social pivots. We've left out certain populations, certainly, and we have a way to hopefully do it this time, to do it right the first time. So again, I really look forward to the discussion, and thanks again for having me here. Oh, wait, I'm supposed to talk about what I think about the plan too, aren't I? Sorry. Nick, I feel like Nick stole a lot of really great talking points. That's the good thing about being the leadoff hitter. What I kind of want to say is what I appreciate about the plan is it's similar to kind of how Renew operates. We take an all of the above approach to renewable energy. We don't consider distributed to be better than utility. We think every little bit has a place to play. We think, we need to get to this, transition as fast as we can. We need a combination of distributed resources and utility resources as well. And there's certainly a limit to what rooftop and battery storage and energy efficiency can do. And that comes from someone who lives and breathes in the distributed realm. The Public Service Commission did a technical potential study last year of what, rooftop solar could do in our state. And, if we could wave a magic wand and get rid of all policy and economics and things like that, we could do almost 37 gigawatts of solar in Wisconsin, which sounds like a huge number, and it is a huge number. It would make up about 70% of our electric needs. But the bad thing is that isn't an ideal situation, right? That house gets solar because it's got a good roof. It's that house gets solar because it has a good roof. It doesn't take into effect all the policies that surround it. It doesn't take into effect if that house needs to be re-roofed. It doesn't take into effect how much energy that old brown space uses. It just does. It looks at rooftops and if they're sunny or not, basically.
So Sam, I have a question. If you want equity, if you want like poor people to have access to all this stuff, isn't it cheaper to have their own distributed power than to pay a utility that's getting monopoly profits?
Oh yeah, I was just
you
talking
said
about,
you want a little bit of everything. You can't have equity if you have utilities charging so much. Then the poor people suffer more. You can't have this all. You got to pick one.
That's not true, Kathleen. I mean,
I just,
You got,
yeah, I
I'm so-
was,
sorry to Sam to jump in, but like,
go ahead.
we've got roofs that are leaking. So not only you have to repair the roofs on these houses, you have outdated electrical systems in houses. So we are working to try to, with our office, we're trying to work on holistic improvements to homes, but there are a lot of very real barriers to getting solar on every rooftop. We got tree canopy, we got competing goals with getting trees up.
Well, there was
So-
a question in the chat. Can you only do solar? Can't you do other stuff too?
You can do wind, but wind is very difficult to do distributed wind. Wind typically are utility scale. I was the project manager on the wind turbine by the Port of Milwaukee. So we have done that, but it's hard to get to scale here. We've got to get the big stuff to hit these carbon goals, and we can't pretend that we're going to hit net zero energy on the entire grid for all of our electricity, all of our streetlights, all of our manufacturing, all of our cars, all of our heating with just rooftop. It's just, there's not
So
enough
you're saying
space.
net zero, then you're prioritizing net zero over equity? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that at all. I don't think I said that at all.
Well, you
You
have
have to
prioritize
balance these
something.
things. You have to balance these things.
Well, but you can say balance, but in the end, everything's gonna get prioritized. You gotta choose what's most important to you.
No, you don't. We have to do it. We have to balance all of it. It has to get, that's my view anyway. I mean, I'm interested to hear what the other speakers have to say, but at this point, we've got a legislature that hasn't taken up any meaningful renewable portfolio standards that haven't made it easier to do things. So we butted up against the Public Service Commission, which was supposed to be friendly, and they are doing some things, but you know the limits of how far we've gotten with regulators. We haven't gotten very far with the legislature. And in terms of city funding, the city has its own financial constraints. We got good news coming with the Inflation Reduction Act, but the city does not have its own funding to fund major, well, we all know the city's financial constraints. So that's, anyway, all of those things kind of contributed to my thinking that I didn't see a path around working with the utility, but I'm interested to hear what other folks have to say.
Yeah, why don't we, the question, I think it's a really good debate to have, and maybe Nick and Sam, you can say more about this. The premise that Erick's operating on, that I think our task force is operating on, that we want to do all of the above. We want as much distributed as possible, but there's a need for utility scale renewable energy as well. What are your thoughts on, what the mix of that can be and what direction to go? Is it an either or question?
Here, I'll give a hypothetical. Actually, I'll start with a real instance. So this was in, I believe, 2015, that the Public Service Commission at that time was very utility friendly, and also friendly with Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce. And there was a very tight business alignment, which, if you think about the regulatory compact, right? This idea that we have a 3-person appointed body that ensures that these very influential and very wealthy utility companies operate in the public good, which is really to keep costs low, keep the power on, and not avoid cross subsidization. At time, one of the policies du jour was to increase fixed charges on residential customers, while at the same time selling power to key industrial customers at wholesale cost. And one of those customers was Quad Graphics. And the justification at that time is that the Public Service Commission is given latitude to advance policy that meets greater state policy. Time, the idea was that Quad Graphics was a core industry and employs a lot of people, and it competes in a global marketplace, so that low energy costs were a priority for Quad Graphics. So I'll give you a hypothetical. Right now, one commissioner, ex-executive director of Renewable Wisconsin, Tyler Hebner, hasn't even been confirmed by the current Senate. Because once he's confirmed, he serves for 6 years. And the political play is that if the Democrats, if Evers loses in this coming election, then they just won't confirm Tyler. He'll have to leave and they'll get to appoint someone they want, and they'll have a two-person majority on a 3-person commission. And the Republican Party has a very simple energy policy, which is do whatever the energy lobby tells them to do. And so the commission again will flip to utility control. But let's play hypothetical here. The hypothetical is that Tyler was confirmed by the Senate because that's what they were supposed to do, and then COVID hit. Now, would it have been possible for this Public Service Commission to advance a rule that required the utilities to prioritize equity in all of their investment decision making, to basically invest in economic opportunity zones all across Milwaukee and in low-income neighborhoods and low-income serving businesses with utility programs that heavily subsidize energy efficiency? Maybe they would 10x the focus on energy program. I put this out as a hypothetical to say, this is, this is about process, right? And so to Kathleen's point, I understand your frustration because you're like, why feed the beast? Why contribute to something that the process is not contributing to changing what we have currently? And I also hear what Erick is saying, which is like, hey, this is the opportunity that's available to us now. And we're at like less than 10% renewables. So if we can crank up the amount of renewable energy, regardless of how it happens, it needs to happen. What
Well,
I would say,
I would just ask, why is Wisconsin only at 10%? Why is it so much further behind surrounding states? And maybe it's because you're feeding the beast instead of fighting the beast.
the challenge in the energy market in the United States is, we're not Xi Jinping's China. We are a balkanized market where we are 50 states and states rule the roost. And so state policies result in energy markets. If you look at, for example, the Minnesota Solar Energy Jobs Act that resulted in almost 900 megawatts of community solar all around the Twin Cities, state policy action. If you look at Illinois' Clean Energy Jobs Act, state policy action, community choice aggregation in Ohio. All of these things are, state policy decisions. I don't mean to answer why things haven't happened in Wisconsin. We have a broken political system, and we have no state policy action. So the frustration from a jurisdictional level, like the city of Milwaukee, I feel it's palpable. I'm happy, Erick, that you're still fighting the good fight down there.
Yeah, well, I'd like to cut in here. I do want to get to questions. People have very specific questions that I think some of our experts can answer, but just to me, it seems to me we're clear that a city and a county that wants to achieve greenhouse gas and equity objectives doesn't have direct control. And therefore, people who have more control or institutions that have more control have to be influenced. And you can see a variety of ways to do that. Corporate campaigns, right, to put pressure on, the WEC Corporation, PSC, legislative, whatever. Question I would have is from the city's perspective, and based on anything about what's happened in other states, what do you think the best way forward is for the city to achieve its objectives and actually influence what We Energies does or doesn't do, as far as making distributed energy possible as widely available, and as far as having more renewables in the utility scale mix?
Well, I would agree with, in the sense that, agree with the other panelists that would prefer better policy change. And we are advocating for that at the Public Service Commission. There are things like performance-based budgeting or performance-based rate making that would create better incentives for the utilities to allow for distributed solar and so all of that I think makes sense. And we have been the tip of the spear for trying to open up markets for how homeowners can finance who don't have the money through solar loans and other forms of third-party financing, which haven't happened. So we haven't gotten there. But that being said, I think that the biggest thing that we have is we are a large customer. And so if we can at least tell the utility, look, we are already, quote, feeding the beast, because we are already, all of us, everyone on this call who is connected to the grid is paying into the utility system, because that's how our system is. So we're all feeding the fossil fuel beast right now. And what we have said is, look, if we got to buy power from you, we at least want it to come from renewables. So please work with us to build new solar and start to retire your coal-fired power plants. And oh, by the way, when you do build that new solar, we wanted to create local jobs so that the people that really need to be employed have an opportunity to get these jobs. So that's been our approach. And I hope you can the takeaway here is that from my standpoint, we don't have a great policy environment in Wisconsin, and we're doing the best we can without the options that other states legislators have given cities.
Do the other panelists have any thoughts on the best way to influence the direct decision makers?
So I've been working with the city of Madison a lot, and the city has built out a lot of rooftop solar, over 1 megawatt. They're going to be building even more, especially with the implementation of electric buses. They're going to be putting a bunch more solar on their bus barns. But there are some facilities that they have, water pumping facilities come to mind right away, that have a relatively small 2-dimensional footprint, but use a lot of energy, and they use it almost all the time. So it makes, rooftop or even, behind the meter grid tied solar really tricky for those types of facilities. And this is when it's really good for the city to work with the utility. As Erick said, the city, whether it be Milwaukee or Madison, is a big customer of that utility. And if they can work with that utility to procure some offsite renewables, that is a way that, in my opinion, both parties win. The city gets the renewables either through the credits or through the rates, and the utility gets to add renewable energy sources to their mix.
So you said that with the We Energy's solar, you would pay a 1 cent per kilowatt hour premium to do that with them. You also said that you've got this Wisconsin Local Government Climate Coalition. If all these cities are big customers, don't you have leverage with the utilities to not pay that 1% premium?
Yeah, so I didn't give you the whole sordid history, but we originally said we want renewable that should cost less, and they created a program. You can look it up. It's called the Distributed Renewable Energy Resource Program. And it was very complicated, and it involved wholesale power rates and things like that. And it was limited. The way it was set up is we could only have gotten up to probably 20% of our power from renewables, because it was solar is cheaper when the sun is shining than coal. But the city uses a lot of power when the sun isn't shining. And so in order to give us a pathway to get to 100% renewable, we traded longer, we wanted shorter terms. So traded that for more transparency, for more security in what the pricing would be, and came out with the cent premium to get these other things and local jobs. So without getting into too many details, it was We Energies has to try to manage the grid and the whole mix of everything they've got out there. And so that's where we landed. Again, that was before the Inflation Reduction Act. I think those numbers should be looked at again now that there's tax credits are in play that weren't there when we thought. That work was done before the Inflation Reduction Act and all the new tax credits that are out there. So I think that number should be revisited. And hopefully the Public Service Commission will, in reviewing it, would do their job and apply their regulatory lens to try to make sure the price is right.
And since we're coming to sort of the last half hour of the discussion, I'd like to get to some of the questions that have come up in chat. And I would encourage people, if you want to make your comment directly, just raise your hand. You just go to the reactions in the lower bar there when you put your cursor underneath everybody's pictures, and you'll see that you can raise your hand and that we can call on you. One question that came in that actually I believe Sam already answered, but I think other people might not have noticed. As far as greening the grid, is there a figure out there for the percentage contribution from local or distributed sources such as homes and businesses? So that's one straightforward question. I would just maybe add to that, what do we think the actual potential is for the percentage of our electricity that could come from distributed sources on rooftops, whether it be a business like IKEA or homes or what have you, if anyone knows?
Yeah, Sam referenced the Public Service Commission study that looks at technical potential. They also did an efficiency potential study. Right now, we're less than 1% distributed PV contribution, and it's not even measured. Let's just put a bookmark here. We used to have what's known as integrated resource planning, which is, we called it advanced planning. So the utilities would have to file with the Public Service Commission a 10-year plan that forecasted what they expected for demand, technology innovation, what they needed for generation, and all the costs. So you can imagine if you require a utility to file a 10-year plan with you, then you have 10 years to check their assumptions, and utilities always pretend that gas is going to be cheaper than it is, always pretend that coal is going to be cheaper than it is, and always pretend that distributed generation and efficiency are going to be more expensive than they are. We got into this Faustian bargain, and now we have a state public benefits program called Focus on Energy, but in getting that program, we got rid of the advanced plan. And so our data, as reported in the strategic energy assessment, is always 2.5 to 3 years behind. And so you can't look, and Renew does a good job of tracking this at just kind of like Focus on Energy data for applications and general independent reporting, but it's not really factored into the contribution of the system. Many other states do a much better job of tracking their distributed generation than we do in Wisconsin. But if you look at the Public Service Commission report, as Sam mentioned, technical potential would be 70%. Now, when you factor in the economic potential, that dramatically reduces. However, for scale, it also means without a single policy at that time, this is before the Inflation Reduction Act. So without a single policy adoption, you were looking at 10x market growth year over year. And so we see a really significant potential. I see WPR has an article out that says nearly more than 90,000 homes can install rooftop solar in Wisconsin under the Inflation Reduction Act. And so they're kind of like looking at some initial estimates, but so that the answer is we don't know. But what's happened with the Inflation Reduction Act is that it's done a couple things that will dramatically speed the adoption of distributed solar and energy storage. The first thing is it locks in a 30% tax credit for 10 years. And when it comes to the clean energy market, having a 10-year horizon where something is consistent is unheard of. It's never been that way. It's the best possible thing for business planning. Everybody's super excited about it. The second thing it does is it includes a direct pay tax credit similar to the child tax credit for government entities and their political subdivisions and nonprofit organizations. So it used to be you get a tax credit, you need to have a tax appetite. It was basically like a 30% discount for rich people. Now it's a direct pay for any non-tax entity, which opens up the market to a whole new unit, schools, hospitals, churches.
Nick, what do you mean by
scouts.
direct pay?
Means that so a nonprofit organization, say the MREA, say I build $1 million solar project. That means I have a $300,000 tax credit. I file my taxes with the IRS. I let them know that we did the solar project. They cut me a $300,000 check.
It's like a Foxconn tax credit.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of like, so it's good. It's good for the solar biz. And the third thing that, I mean, this legislation does a lot, but the third thing that it does is it has a transferability provision. So that, which is meant to create a market for tax credit transfer. So for example, if you are a low to moderate income household and you get a solar PV system, you might not be able to use that full tax credit, but somebody else will, and they'll buy it from you.
So does that mean the utilities are gonna ask for a cut of your tax credit when they negotiate with you?
Well, you know, the nobody actually knows at this point exactly what the market's going to look like. There'll be a lot of innovation. But the challenge here is, I mean, to stick to the question, which is how much is coming from distributed generation. The challenge is in Wisconsin, one, data clarity. We don't have a transparent market. The utilities currently manage all their distributed generation applications. Somebody at the utility just manages them in an Excel spreadsheet. And they report them to the commission as needed or when the strategic energy assessment needs to happen. And so that's number one. And number two is understanding the impact of this legislation in the political, social, and economic context of Wisconsin. And so without a clear kind of like legislative pathway or a clear public service commission priority, or even an understanding of what the future of net metering is in the state, it's a really difficult question to answer what the potential is. But I would reference you, and maybe Sam, if you have access to it, or I will put the link to the Wisconsin Solar Potential Study in the chat.
If we could, there's a lot of questions in the chat about, I think people are feeling frustrated that the conversation a little bit because we know we need this transition. We want it to be just, we want it to be affordable, particularly for people of color. We want to make sure that that people know what to do, how to act based on this conversation. So I would just offer a couple things. First, there is a chance to comment on We Energy's rate case. They are taking public comment. And I think the messaging is clear. From my standpoint, we need to start retiring coal-fired power plants, and we got to get a timeline, and we got to get that done because the coal-fired power plants affect all of us. They affect communities of color, not only from a climate standpoint, but air pollution. So I'm hoping that we can get some agreement to start retiring those plants, to get serious about making sure people know about the tax credits that are coming, so that people that want to do renewable energy can do that we got a workforce to do it, that we got contractors, including contractors of color, that are trained up to do solar, so we can take that advantage of that opportunity. And I hope when the time comes, I would just ask that when if we do have a chance to buy renewables from We Energies versus fossil fuels, that people could back us up in that. So.
Well, this gets to, I'm glad you brought that up, Eric. There's a lot of questions. Some of them are very kind of specific and informational, but there is this broader question of the relationship between getting greener electricity and having energy be more affordable for people who are having a hard time paying for it. And we all know that there's a lot of organizing when the utility tries to shut people's power off as soon as the weather gets warm enough. It's been going on and on. So there's this broader question: what is the relationship between getting greener electricity and having it be more affordable for people who are historically discriminated against and, you know, just are having a really hard time keeping a roof over their head and food on the table given the cost of energy? And subsidiary to that, someone brought up the question of this rate case, which Eric mentioned. Should the increase that We Energies is asking for be opposed? How does that fit in with getting a greener electricity mix? Big questions. I don't know if there's immediate answers.
Yeah,
Well, I guess I could say my view is that there are costs realistically do go up, but I wish that we could see rate increases be tied to real clear progress on transition, including, like I said, the retirement of the coal plants. I think a lot of people are concerned about raising rates if we're just building more solar, but keeping all of the old power plants open.
Yeah, so this is a wicked problem. There's no easy solution. And the reason it's wicked is because it's like two embedded systems that don't have easy solutions. The first system is that, that the goal of a utility investor is to make money. That's the number one thing they have to do. That's what they're required to do, what their shareholders are required to do. And in a regulated utility context, you have a 3-person appointed commission that's supposed to create a semblance of market competition. And so what the utilities want and what they lobby for and what they file for at the commission is to keep their plants open as long as possible. And if they were to be shut down, that they get paid for the full life of the plants plus all of their profit. And then they'll also fight to build what we call gold-plated renewable projects. There's, if you are a utility investor and you can get a 10% rate of return, and you have a lot of money to invest, do you want $1 million solar project or a $2 million solar project? And so there's always a push to everything gets more expensive. And that process is really difficult to get out of in the system we have. When it comes to energy costs, the energy burden, which Sierra Club has a solid initial study in Milwaukee that not only basically tracks energy burden to redline districts, but also tracks the pollution burden of power plants to redline districts. The challenge there is also a wicked problem in that the current that exists through the low income weatherization program and through LIHEAP, the low income heating energy assistance program. What it does is it doesn't incentivize energy efficiency improvements for the vast majority of low to moderate income households. It incentivizes dependence because it's especially LIHEAP is just a transfer of funds to the federal funds to the utility energy bills. Now, does that mean we should get rid of LIHEAP? Definitely not. Tons of people depend on it so that they can have heat and electricity. But it does mean that we need programs that invest in households for people with high energy burden, invest in their energy efficiency and improvement there. And there are programs, for example, the Pay As You Save, which is an inclusive utility financing program that the utilities in Wisconsin could and should offer their customers. And that's something also that could be advanced through the Public Service Commission. When it comes to the We Energies rate cases, I think a lot of the comments around equity should be focused on the commission requiring the utility to report data about the energy burden of their ratepayers, because that should be something that the utilities are very aware of and that are reported to the commission, and very few commissions in the country actually require that. And that is a very good place to start to really start to understand the problem so that you can advance solutions to it.
Okay, that's very helpful. Does anyone else want to comment? We do actually have someone raising their hand in the audience, which is great. But does anyone else, Sam or Kathleen, do you want to comment on this question of like equity and green?
I want to make a point here, because this is going back to Kathleen's earlier statement on about rooftop solar, and it is true. Like the most effective way to reduce your energy burden, your utility bill, is through rooftop solar. But as we all know, the vast majority of that adoption on the household scale now so far has been from middle and upper class white folks, right? We've also seen, however, a little bit of movement on the very low income housing side. Solar for Good has actually helped out. I think it's at least 4 or 5 projects now with housing authorities where that electricity directly supplies their meter. So we're seeing, we've already seen movement on the top end. We're actually starting to see some movement on the low end now. And what happens a lot, and I feel like we've seen this in other industries like healthcare and whatnot, it's those people who are still not very well off, but just well enough off to be on their own that might get left behind, right? And this is where I think we really need that's going to be a really tough nut to crack, especially when you get into multifamily units. Really surprising things like sub-metering and meter allocation, I should say, would actually go a long way to help these kinds of projects. We're working on a 4-unit building right now in Madison. It's actually just down the street from me, so I can drive by and see it almost every day. We're hoping to consolidate all of their meters, get a very large heat pump installed, and also get solar on top of the roof there as well. And there are a lot of things that can do this outside of just this one little pilot project we're working on. The IRA is certainly going to be a big help, but I think third-party financing would also help a lot as well. But again, there are going to be some gaps in there where these things don't equate to renewable energy equity for everyone. And that is going to be the really tough part to solve of this going forward.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the question from the audience, person raising her hand, I probably will butcher your last name. I apologize, is Ann Batiza. Ann, are you able to unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment?
Yes, thank you. I think, has Erick left or?
He
Anyway,
had to step away briefly, but hopefully he'll
okay.
return shortly.
First of all, I just want to applaud the effort that Erick and the entire task force has made to make our city more green and also have a more equitable economic plan. I am a bit discouraged, honestly, by listening to the back and forth. There seemed to be, besides the fact that We Energies seems to operate as a monopoly and somehow make it difficult to invest in solar, adjust its rates so that, anyway, it's very discouraging. Also, from Vaclav Smil's book, How the World Really Works, in 2020, he said Germany still had to keep 89% of its fossil fuel capacity in order to meet demand on cloudy and calm days, even though it had spent an enormous effort to go to renewables. I applaud the efforts. It seems like such a daunting project. It's hard to see an end where, unless we cut back our expectations and we cut back our use of energy, that we're going to achieve anything resembling something that affects climate and equity in the city, unless we have conservation as a huge part of what we do. I don't know. Can someone comment on that?
I think you're absolutely right, Ann. Thanks for the comments. We're talking about one of the 10 big ideas. Energy conservation is certainly part of that. We are planning what we're calling Green and Healthy Homes Initiative to try to combine lead abatement and energy efficiency in our homes. With transportation, we are working to redesign our streets so they're more pedestrian and bike friendly, so we don't have to rely on cars. And there's a whole range of other things in the climate plan that we didn't talk about tonight, but you're absolutely right. There are things that we can do. We are trying to operate within political climate in the state that's not ideal, but there are pathways forward, and we're working hard to make those real, not only from a policy standpoint with the utility, but also to create jobs for people that really, really need them, and create equity and to really improve our neighborhoods through green jobs, through home improvements, and a more inclusive planning process.
Erick,
Yeah, that's one thing.
Sorry, it
Go
sounds
ahead,
like you
Kathleen.
put a ton of work into thinking through all this stuff, and I'm just curious, like, what do you think are the most important things in that plan that you put together?
Well, there was a lot of people put it together, so we've had 70 plus.
I meant you, plural.
Yes, okay. I think I'm really optimistic about the future for fixing up our homes in our neighborhoods through not only retrofitting existing houses for energy efficiency, but building new net zero energy homes in our neighborhoods. I think that there is a lot we can do and be encouraged about in terms of the need to build out electric vehicle charging infrastructure in the state. I mean, we've got historic, exciting federal investments to try to lead that transition away from gas-powered cars to electric, but we got to do it in a smart way that supports equity. I think a lot of the work that Mayor Johnson's doing with reckless driving has a climate spin, because if we redesign our streets away from getting cars flying around as fast as possible to make it more pedestrian friendly and bike friendly communities with an eye towards increasing Milwaukee's population through density, that's part of the climate solution. So there is a lot of really, really positive stuff in this plan. We picked the hardest nut to crack in this topic tonight, but even there are shoots of hope coming up. I mean, 10 years ago, the utility wasn't doing any solar. They thought it was kind of just this thing for the few, the elite the wealthy that wanted to do it. But they see that it's cheaper to build solar than have coal-fired power plants. So there's room for hope here. And I don't want people to get discouraged, because we got to work together, and we got to roll up our sleeves and make something happen here.
Yeah, and Eric, I just wanted to say I was really surprised and happy and impressed to see that the first thing on that 10 big ideas list was green and healthy homes. I think a lot of times we forget about the effects of energy efficiency and conservation. I mean, I tell people, I think this quote is stolen from Nick Hylla, and he can probably quote it better than me, but the cheapest and cleanest kilowatt hour we can possibly have is the one we never produce or consume to begin with. So I just want to state and I want to bring that up first of all, and really I don't want to I want to emphasize the fact that efficiency can do a lot of things for us.
Yeah, I'll say something optimistic. I appreciated that last comment, especially that Clough's Mill reference. And you hear a lot about Germany right now because it's a political talking point, which is the frustrating part. It's always taking the negatives and using it against the idea of clean energy transition. But there's a few things missing in that conversation and a few optimistic things about us. The first is there's a benefit to being a laggard. When Germany started its energy Welt, its transition, the vast majority of technologies that are at our fingertips today, which is distributed energy storage with smart demand response management, were not available to them. That makes the distributed adoption of resources like solar energy effective in demand reduction by doing arbitrage like peak load shaving and providing grid services. The second is that if you think about the Industrial Revolution, Germany industrialized in 30 years, and in some ways we still are. And we still are because we have a vast geography. And the thing that we have that Germany doesn't have is a vast geography of interconnected transmission lines that allows for the deployment of variable renewables that over a wide geography provide pretty significant baseload power when you combine solar and wind. So I think that the positive thing here, the negative thing is that every inch that we gain on the distribution side of investment that's not utility owned, they act like the sky is falling, that somehow we're a threat to the grid, that we're cross shifting, that we're threatening their profits, when there's, as in the German model, is we have decades and decades and decades of behind the meter deployment that we can do in conservation and efficiency and demand response and solar and energy storage and electrification. And we'll still need the utility. When we transitioned to the automobile and started driving on the roads instead of trains, we never got rid of the trains. We still use the trains. That's exactly what the transition is going to be like. And what we need are rules that put us in partnership with the utility instead of fighting against them, because we should be working all for the same goal.
Well, that might be a good way. I know that we have some questions that were not answered and another hand up. But we are committed to being done within a half an hour. We do need to do a little wrap up. I think one of the fundamental points here is that we can hatch plans that look very good, and we're going to have like a movement and a popular opinion and something to kind of push the powers that be to do what needs to be done. And so one of the things we're hoping is that people on the call are encouraged that there's possibilities and that there's a vital need and a tremendous benefit to doing what our plan calls for and more. So we have a slide. Were you going to do that, Jennifer, on what people can do to be involved as a final slide?
Eric has that slide.
Oh, it's Eric's. Okay. So were you going to talk that slide, Eric?
Yeah, sure. So there is, I guess there's a hearing tomorrow on the We Energies rate case. So there's an opportunity to speak there. The city is also having a budget hearing on October 3rd at 6 p.m. So you can register to make a comment in support of climate action there or whatever else you'd like to say on the city budget. And then you can check out the website and there's a link there. That is where we have information about the climate plan. So you can read about the 10 big ideas and then share feedback on the plan. Of course, we'd love for you to follow the Our Future Milwaukee group, which is Our Future Milwaukee is a coalition of various organizations that are supporting the city and its efforts for climate action. And so to keep up with updates on different events and opportunities to stay involved, we encourage people to sign up. So thank you all for joining tonight. Hopefully this is a great panel, and we got to do this together, and we hope this is just the start of a bigger coalition for climate action and an equitable transition to the future.
There's a lot of work to do. Do any of the panelists want to leave us with any final words as far as steps people can take to be involved and make the good things happen in this area, since we have a couple minutes?
You think the city should have a referendum?
So under, again, state law, referendums are limited use to. So I would encourage people to.
Would they
talk
put
to
you
their
in jail if you had one?
I don't know.
What would be the penalty for the city of Milwaukee deciding to have a referendum?
I don't know. What would the referendum say? I guess that would be the question.
Do people approve the plan that you're proposing? Do they support it? I mean, you're saying you want to build, momentum in a coalition. We'll ask them.
So the common council and the county board hopefully will adopt the plan. I think we're hoping that there is active people that, can let their voices be heard, that they'd like to see the plan adopted. That's the way these things typically get approved. And then beyond the plan adoption, it's, making sure that we continue to think about climate and all of the decisions that the city is making going forward.
I would just point out.
Sometimes you got to disobey the babysitter, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly share your sentiments. The one thing I would just point out is whatever you do, whether it's a referendum or getting the common council to take appropriate action or the zoning committee or what have you, all of it takes people showing up and being involved. To do a referendum involves a lot of volunteer work, right? And that could be a great tactic, right, to do what we need to do. And there are probably a lot of different strategies that we can embark on. But the bottom line is that the people who make the decisions need to know that there's a public demand. They need to know that it can benefit them politically to do these things. And in short, they need to see that there's widespread support in any number of ways. So some of that can be just if there's 10 people who speak at the October 3rd hearing. That's something that they hear. Wow, there's a lot of people hearing about this. But we hope everybody will stay engaged and take whatever opportunities do present themselves to show that this is really, really important to people and can be beneficial for the politicians themselves if they do the right thing.
Maybe an online poll.
Yeah, so at the Engagement MKE website, there are tools for people to interactive tools. The full plan will be out in late October. So right now it's kind of the conceptual plans, but there will be an opportunity for people to review and react to the actual full written document as well. And then of course, speak up at public hearings.
But I believe, Eric, a draft of the full document will be available within the next couple weeks. Is that right?
Yep, we're gonna let the task force members look at it first to make sure at least the task force thinks we got it right, and then we'll open it up for public comment to the broader public.
See, so that's something to look for in the immediate future, what the full draft plan looks like. Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for coming. We've hit 8 o'clock, and we very much appreciate our panelists being available for the hour and a half. We know it's getting late.
Eric, did you see in the chat someone was asking for a link to the October 3rd meeting?
If they email us at our future Milwaukee, we can send them the link.
It looked like.
Find it real fast.
looks
I'll
like
find it
it's
fast.
a person.
Great job, everybody. I really enjoyed it myself.
Okay, well, thank you for attending. Eric has put the link in the chat, so we can leave this open for a minute. But I think this concludes our panel. Very much appreciate the honest discussion. It took some twists and turns we probably didn't expect, but something we're going to need to work through if we're going to actually achieve success.